Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wheolya. Chapter 38. Dangerous Visit. Part 1. 4 days later. In a dense forest not far from the estate of Yun Moksword Manor. A man wearing a bamboo hat and carrying a backpack filled with old books and tools, dressed in a navy blue Taoist robe with the yin-yang symbol, was walking somewhere, holding a sword technique hand seal in one hand and a talisman with the character, Chase, written on it in the other. The man continuously chanted an incantation. The heaven and earth are fixed, the sun and moon are fixed, the chi of heaven and earth is bright, the chi of the sun and moon is bright, the chi of gods and ghosts is formed, the mind and the subconscious mind are united, the subconscious mind and the conscious mind are united, the mind of heaven and all minds. This was the harmony mantra. It was a type of summoning harmony technique used to meet someone whose whereabouts were unknown, and he had been searching the surroundings while employing this technique for 2 or 3 days straight. Normally, he would quickly find someone with this technique. However, it's concealed. A very strong and ominous energy was obscuring it. This wasn't a case of going missing or being killed in an ordinary manner. The power of evil spirits or techniques was involved. Who could it be? Sak was considered the third-ranking diviner within Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. Moreover, as she controlled the Imimamiang entity Gaio as her spirit servant, she had the ability to single-handedly exorcise ghosts up to the yellow spirit level. Yet, for her to be defeated like this was incomprehensible. What? How could that be? This is a letter sent by the chief wife of Yun Moksword Manor. Read it. The letter contained a threat-like protest. It stated that if they didn't hand over the penalty of 3,000 silver coins and Sak, they would annihilate Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. If the contents of the letter were true, it was understandable for the chief wife to be angry, but it was unlikely for Sak to engage in such an act. There must be something more to it. Find her and uncover the truth. So, he had been doing this day and night without rest. He had to find her quickly before Yun Moksword Manor made a move. At that moment, while he was focusing on the technique again. Tremble, tremble. The talisman of Chase, held in his left hand, shook violently. Nearby. With that, the man grasped the talisman with both hands and chanted an incantation. The body and mind are virtuous, the ghosts and demons fill the sky, the left protects and the right necessitates, the clouds gather and disperse, the water flows and the valley is deep, the golden lock and the 4 seals, urgently execute the imperial edict. As soon as the incantation ended, the shaking characters on the talisman darkened and floated in the air on their own, flying somewhere. Flap flap. The man followed the flying talisman. Eventually, the talisman bent downward somewhere. It was hidden by thick bushes, and when he passed through, a quite steep cliff appeared. It was a place where one could easily fall to their death if they misstepped. The man looked around and found a slope to descend. There, he discovered the talisman lying neatly on the ground. However, something else caught his eye before the talisman. In the surroundings, there were fragments of flesh and dried bloodstains, making it difficult to recognize the human form. Upon seeing this, the man couldn't help but frown. How could this happen? He had never anticipated such an outcome. He had considered the possibility of her being attacked, but this was more serious than he thought. The man swallowed his dry saliva. This was definitely not something that could happen with a mere yellow spirit level entity. What on earth happened? Nothing could be determined solely based on this horrific scene. If at least the corpse had been intact, there would have been a way to find out in detail through necromancy, but with this, the chances were slim. However, there was no other choice. The man placed his hand on the ground in the center of the catastrophe and closed his eyes. Then, chuck, chuck. He formed hand seals with his left hand. Gi. 2. John. Oibok hand seal, OESA, followed by the Babion. They were the hand seals of the 9-character Therni. 3 in Bright method. The Northern Emperor has granted me authority. So reveal all that has transpired. Urgently execute the imperial edict. Tremble, tremble. The blood-stained objects on the ground began to tremble slightly. Beads of cold sweat formed on the man's forehead. When one is killed by an evil spirit, even the soul and the remaining bodily energy are damaged, making it difficult to draw out the traces through incantations. Reveal everything. Urgently execute. The man's head was thrown back. Then, like a flashback, fleeting memories pierced his mind. Swish. Myosin. Cough cough, I deflected the killing technique you sent. Are you a diviner? Phew. It's quiet now. How can you grasp an imimaniang with your bare hands? You said you'd do anything, right? Now I'm retreating like this, but before long. Shiver. At that moment, along with an ominous and spine-chilling energy, the man's consciousness returned. The man muttered with trembling eyes. What was that? The memory was cut off along with the tremendous fear Sack had felt at the end. It seemed like something had snipped off that part. If it were this level of fear and dread, there should have been at least a little bit of the final fragment visible, but there was none. Strange. All beings fall into fear in the face of death. However, the fear seen before this abruptly cut off memory wasn't the fear felt before dying but the emotion experienced while facing some immense terror. What on earth happened? He grew even more curious. The memories were too short, like fleeting moments, so it was impossible to know exactly what had transpired. Through the glimpses of some memories, he had only learned one thing. Mok Jiangan. That person was at the center of Sack's death and this incident. Although it was just a fragment, there was one particularly memorable memory. Grasping an imimaniang with bare hands? It was a difficult feat even for diviners unless they met special conditions. From this, one of two things could be inferred. Either this young master named Mok Jiangan was possessed by a yellow spirit, as they had initially suspected, making this possible. Or he might have been born with spiritual talent. If it was the latter, it was a remarkable talent. He might be a natural-born diviner. Such talent was hard to find. It was said that even the slightest ability to sense spiritual traces through one of the five senses indicated talent. However, touching an imimaniang, a massive demonic energy, without any conditions was on a completely different level. The man shook his head. This isn't what's important. For now, he had to make contact with this fellow named Mok Jiangan to find out what had happened. The man glanced at the air and muttered. Gojo. I have a feeling we shouldn't let our guard down. With those words, he gestured for someone to follow. Then, the shadow of an eagle on the ground flapped its wings in response. The strange thing was that the head of the eagle in this shadow had a peculiar set of horns. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Shining Orchid Pavilion, located at the southern end of the back alley in the low-end market. It was overflowing with various low-quality prostitutes. Ha 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 ha. Drink up. I'll pay for everything today. Let's get wasted today. Due to these individuals, other customers couldn't even muster the courage to enter. Phew. Watching them, escort guard Go-chan, who was standing at the entrance, sighed. At least this is the only information organization in this area. It was a place of quite low quality. If categorized into high, middle, and low, it would barely qualify as low grade. Just looking at the gathered individuals, the level was significantly inferior. However, he had an order from Mok Jiangan, so he came to make a request at a nearby place. Ask if they know this symbol. Pardon? How do I? You don't need to know the details. Escort guard Go-chan, just submit the request to that information organization or whatever it is. Understood. What could this be? The symbol Mok Jiangan had shown him was quite simple. However, he had never seen it before. It might be because he had retired a long time ago, but if even he, a former assassin, didn't know it, it could be something trivial. Where is he, anyway? The leader of this place should be here. Since it was a low-quality place, there were no special rules, and they would bring information in exchange for money. Ah, there he is. He had met him a few times after settling here. Go-chan sighed once and called out to someone. Boss Guac. At his call, a man sitting in the middle of the inn, filled with the scent of alcohol, slowly turned his head without getting up. Then, blinking his eyes, he seemed to recognize Go-chan and stood up with a bright expression. Oh my! Isn't it escort guard Go-chan from Yun Moksword Manor? Although it had been a long time since they met, he was still a person immersed in alcohol and women. Even now, he had a woman who looked like a courtesan by his side, which was a distasteful sight. Go-chan shook his head and said, I have a request to make. A request? I will pay the proper price. I understand. Come up to the second floor office. Although he didn't like it, he had heard that Boss Guac was originally from the House sect. That's why his information network wasn't too shabby. Not long after entering the private room, a thumping sound was heard from the second floor corridor. He always made such noise due to his large build. He's disqualified as an assassin. The basics of an assassin lie in secrecy and confidentiality. Of course, individuals with such qualities were rare. At that moment, the door to the private room opened, and Boss Guac entered. What are you doing? Go-chan asked, raising an eyebrow. Boss Guac had entered with a woman under his arm. Judging by her upswept hair, heavy makeup, and clothes that showed her cleavage, she seemed to be a courtesan. Her face was so beautiful that it drew the eye, but this wasn't the occasion for that. This is a new girl who recently joined. Isn't she nice? Didn't I say I had a request to make? She's one of our girls, so you don't need to mind her presence. If you have something to say, go ahead. I need to go down soon. This pathetic fellow. Go-chan inwardly felt murderous intent rising within him. No matter how low the quality was, this was truly below standard. If things continued like this, there was no need to make a request. Send her out. Oh, escort guard go. As men, we should enjoy. If she keeps coming out like this, I'll just leave. Those words had an effect. Boss Guac, who had become like a mute who had eaten honey, irritably said to the courtesan, go down and wait for this gentleman obediently. If I find you in the arms of another man, be prepared for the consequences. Then, as he tried to slap her buttocks with his palm. Tack. The courtesan caught Boss Guac's hand. Oh? Phew. How unpleasant. The courtesan muttered as if annoyed. You wench. At her attitude, Boss Guac was dumbfounded and tried to slap her face. At that very moment. Puk. The courtesan's hand had already reached Boss Guac's ear. Then, Boss Guac staggered like a puppet whose strings had been cut. You. Startled by this sight, Go-chan hurriedly tried to draw his dagger, but something that flew from the courtesan's hand pierced his acupoint. Puk. It was a very thin needle. As the needle pierced him, Go-chan couldn't open his mouth or move. It was as if his acupoints had been struck. Dururu. The courtesan pulled out a chair from the table and pushed it behind the staggering Boss Guac. Then, Boss Guac naturally sat on the chair. Of course, from the front, it didn't look like he was in good condition, with his eyes rolled back, showing only the whites of his eyes. This is... Go-chan couldn't hide his bewilderment as he looked at the needle stuck in his chest. As a former member of the Flying Kill sect, he couldn't possibly not know what this was. Lustrous jade flying needles? It was the unique secret skill of Flying Killing Yama's guest technique, the sect leader of the Flying Kill sect and one of the 4 great assassins in the Central Plains. It was impossible for a mere courtesan to use the lustrous jade flying needles, which could be considered the symbol of the sect leader of the Flying Kill sect. The current sect leader, Flying Killing Yama's guest, was a man who had reached the age of 60. Although he was older compared to the active members, His skills were truly unrivaled, allowing him to firmly maintain his position as one of the 4 great assassins for over 20 years. Yet, for his unique secret skill to be in the hands of this courtesan, Go-chan couldn't hide his surprise. He seemed to understand this courtesan's identity now. See, could it be? Flying Killing Yama's guest had a granddaughter. Her name was Ha-Chi-Rin. She was the only surviving blood relative after losing her entire family in an unexpected attack. Flying Kill sect leader poured everything into this remaining bloodline. So far, it was good. It was something that everyone could fully understand. The problem lied elsewhere. Is the sect leader in his right mind? All the assassins of the Flying Kill sect believed that Flying Killing Yama's guest would never pass on his sect leader position to his only granddaughter, because she was utterly unsuitable as an assassin. It was no exaggeration to say that the foundation of an assassin lies in cold rationality. However, that granddaughter was far from it. She was the embodiment of a personality disorder. Her foul language that didn't match her pretty and young age, her extreme misophobia, her anger management issues. Nothing was suitable for an assassin. Everyone opposed it. The last time he saw her was 4 years ago. It was before he retired, but when the executives and all the assassins of the Flying Kill sect protested, Flying Killing Yama's guest forcibly confined her in the Bisseldong, saying he would set her straight. It's impossible. Everyone was convinced that it was absolutely impossible to set her straight. How could he possibly control her fiery temper and make her possess the cold rationality of an assassin? With that, he had forgotten about her. It had been 4 years since he retired, so she would have grown into a proper woman at the age of 19 by now. Proper. Just looking at her impressive breasts that could be grasped, it was evident. She had indeed grown up splendidly. With such an alluring face, anyone would easily fall for her unless they were exceptional. At that moment, she extended her hand towards the wall of the private room. Sook. The needles embedded in the wall were pulled out and attached to the bracelet on her wrist. Seeing this, it was clear that it was indeed Flying Killing Yama's guest's unique secret skill, the lustrous jade flying needles. Her using this meant she had inherited the sect leader position. Then does that mean she succeeded in the 100 days, 100 kills? To become the sect leader of the assassin sect of Flying Killing, there was a rite of passage. It involved taking a test called the 100 days, 100 kills. The 100 days, 100 kills required completing 100 designated requests within 100 days. If one achieved this, they would be called one of the 4 great assassins. Impossible. Given her temperament, it was doubtful she could have accomplished this. Or did the former sect leader truly succeed in raising her into a proper assassin? Perhaps that could be the case. Come to think of it, it was also surprising that she, with her severe misophobia, was enduring and serving alcohol among the prostitutes. Was there room for rehabilitation? If that were the case, the former sect leader might become admirable. After all, he had managed to raise that personality-disordered individual into one of the 4 great assassins. Then, a small voice reached his ears. Oh my! Damn it! He saw Ha-Chi-Rin, disguised as a courtesan, wiping a small drop of blood from her cheek. She had a cold gaze, as if displeased. Seeing her like that reminded him of her younger days when she used to swear. Is she really fixed? As he was feeling doubtful, she approached him. Approaching him, she pulled out one of the needles embedded in his chest. Then, a cough escaped from Go-chan's mouth. Cough, cough. The fact that his voice came out seemed to indicate she had removed the needle, blocking his vocal cords. Ha-Chi-Rin sat on the table, crossing her exposed smooth legs, and said, I never expected to see a retired person like this. Uncle Go-chan. Or should I call you former low-rank assassin number 83? Damn it. It was indeed Ha-Chi-Rin. He thought she would have forgotten since it had been for years, but she remembered him just from the few encounters they had. Go-chan parted his lips with a tense voice. It's been a long time, young lady. Sect leader. Pardon? I'm the sect leader now. He had been skeptical, but his conjecture was correct. She had become the current sect leader of the flying killing. As this fact was revealed, Go-chan was overwhelmed by a sense of unease. The reason was simple. When a retired assassin meets an assassin from their former assassin group, it usually means death. As he was feeling anxious, Ha Chiren said, "Is it because you retired that you don't see me as a sect leader?" And no, how could that be? Congratulations on becoming the new sect leader. Kneel and receive my blessings. At the thick curse that flew out of her mouth, Go-chan was at a loss for words. No matter how he looked at it, she was exactly the same as he remembered her. Even before, it didn't suit her pretty face to utter such profanity. Ha Chiren covered her lips with her hand and said, "Oh my. Look at me. I must have become too comfortable meeting someone I know after a long time. I should put on some airs and such, but a curse slipped out without me realizing it. Please feel free to be comfortable." How can I do that? A lady should have manners. What manners at this point? He thought that inwardly but kept his mouth shut. Of course, he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Rather, he became even more tense. He didn't know what words would come out of her mouth. At that moment, Ha Chiren parted her red lips. "Someone might think I came here to kill you. Grandfather also cherished you too, allowing you to retire together with Uncle Gam. So relax." "Is that true?" Go-chan asked with wide eyes. He had been worried that she might be after his life. But if she said that, it seemed there wouldn't be any significant problems. Phew. He felt relieved. But suddenly, he also found it strange. If she wasn't after him, why did the new sect leader personally appear here and use the lustrous jade flying needles on him? As he was puzzled, Ha Chiren said with a smile, "It's a good thing." "Pardon? What was a good thing?" "I was planning to enter and leave Yun Mok Sword Manor through the eldest young master, who I heard enjoys wine and women, but I can go in together with you, escort guard Go-chan." For a moment, Go-chan furrowed his brow, wondering what she was talking about. Why did she want to enter Yun Mok Sword Manor with him? What do you mean by that? Why would you enter Yun Mok Sword Manor with me? At that question, Ha Chiren slightly lifted Go-chan's chin with her fingertip and spoke in a murderous voice. "I'm thinking of taking the head of the third young master of Yun Mok Sword Manor." Chapter 39. Dangerous Visit. Part 2. "I need the head of the young master you serve." At the words of Ha Chiren, the flying killing sect leader, escort guard Go-chan was momentarily speechless. He had wondered what purpose she had for entering Yun Mok Sword Manor, but this was truly bewildering. What do you mean by that? It's exactly as you heard. I'm going to take the head of the one called Mok Jiangan. Go-chan's mind became complicated. There were a few rules for assassins. One of them was that as long as they belonged to an assassination sect, murder without a request was prohibited. That applied even to the sect leader. Go-chan swallowed his dry saliva and asked, "Did you receive a request?" "No." "Pardon?" At her quick answer, Go-chan furrowed his brow. She came to take Mok Jiangan's head without receiving a request. What was this about? To the puzzled Go-chan, Ha Chiren twirled her hair and said, "A piece of information came in from someone in Yun Mok Sword Manor." "Information?" "Intermediate assassin number 29. Thump. At that moment, Go-chan's heart raced. Intermediate assassin number 29. Senior brother Gam. It was the assassin number of Gam Il Chong, his senior brother. Touching the chin of the stiffened Go-chan, Ha Chiren said, "I heard that assassin number 29, no, Uncle Gam, was killed by Mok Jiangan, the third young master of the Mok family." It was unexpected. To think that the third young master of the Mok family, a mere third-rate, killed a first-rate master who was once a skilled intermediate assassin of the flying killing sect. But there's something even more puzzling. As far as I know, Uncle Go, you were Uncle Gam's junior. So why are you still by Mok Jiangan's side? At her question, Go-chan was at a loss for words. It was extremely awkward to answer. If he said he had submitted to him, even though he was retired, she might harm him for turning a blind eye to the death of a former fellow disciple. But if he kept his mouth shut, he would also find himself in an unfavorable situation. Damn it. After a moment of deliberation, Go-chan barely parted his lips. I had no choice but to wait for an opportunity. Opportunity? Since it's been quite some time since I retired, my skills weren't sufficient to immediately deal with the mock family fellow who killed my elder brother. At Go-chan's words, the suspicious Ha-Chiren grinned. Then, placing her hand on Go-chan's shoulder, she said, as expected of Uncle Go. I knew it would be like that. No matter how retired you are, how could an assassin of the flying killing sect submit to the enemy and turn a blind eye when his own elder brother was attacked? It felt like a dagger was flying and piercing his chest. However, for Go-chan to escape this situation as much as possible, this was the only way. Although she was young, if she had become the sect leader and inherited the title of Flying Killing Yama's guest, her martial prowess would be at least at the peak realm or above. If he couldn't run away, he had to use his head. How could that be? My senior brother cherished me so much. He was so cherished that he was interrogated to the point of torture, had 2 fingers cut off, and was treated with such affection. So, even if he died, he had no desire for revenge or longing. However, these words seemed to have an effect, as Ha-Chiren nodded her head and then tuck, tuck, tuck. She removed the needles embedded in his chest. As the needles were removed, his stiffened body moved, and he could breathe properly instead of taking half-breaths. Don't feel too bad. I needed to verify whether Uncle Go had submitted to the young master of the mock family or if there was another reason. Silently regulating his breathing, Go-chan asked her, but young La? No, sect leader. Yes? This isn't a matter that requires the sect leader to personally intervene, so why? Why? Pardon? Is there a reason I can't personally intervene? And no, how could that be? There was no reason she couldn't. It was just a bit puzzling that someone who had inherited the title of Flying Killing Yama's guest, one of the 4 great assassins, would personally intervene in a matter related to a retired assassin, not even a top-tier request. Of course, considering her temperament, it could have been a whim. Ha-Chiren grinned at Go-chan and said, since we're at it, let's depart for Yun Mock Sword Manor. Seeing her enthusiastic demeanor, Go-chan's complexion darkened. I have to let him know somehow. Otherwise, his life might truly be in danger. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Pack. Pa 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 pack. Mock Jayangun, practicing the stepping technique, the foundation of body tempering techniques, for nearly 3 hours. Although it had only been 4 days since he started proper martial arts training, at a glance, his posture was as precise as if he had practiced for several years. Watching Mock Jayangun, Chang Ryang clicked her tongue. What kind of fellow is this? He was training martial arts independently through self-study. She had thought he would ask for her help to some extent, but there was none of that. Yet he had already achieved such mastery. It's astonishing. Even when she was alive, she had seen countless martial talents. But this type was a first. Usually, when starting martial arts, one practices basic forms. Forms are a type of shape, and when these forms are connected, they develop into a complete technique. Therefore, mastering forms is important. The reason for repeating the same posture is to make it familiar to the body. In the Gango, life and death confrontations are frequent. In such moments, the outcome is often determined in an instant. Because one cannot calculate many things in that instant, the outcome can be completely different depending on how familiar the body is. Therefore, martial artists continuously repeat postures during training. However, except for the first time he assumed the posture, he never made a mistake from the second time onward. Mock Jayang'un's posture had not the slightest deviation. He repeated that posture dozens of times over 3 hours without the slightest error. This was possible because 2 conditions were met. With his unbelievable memory, his body is embodying it exactly based on that memory. It was no exaggeration to call this miraculous. Even if one remembers it in their head, physically reproducing it is a separate issue. Yet this fellow can do it. He can move his body accurately as he has learned or intended. There is almost no margin for error. There were sections where he needed to repeatedly adapt because the necessary muscles for some movements were not developed, but otherwise, long-term training would be meaningless. Phew. The smoke thickened. The tobacco in the pipe kept burning. Watching this fellow, the desire to teach him something continuously arises. However, she suppressed that. Only those who are qualified can learn her techniques. And in any case, he had already obtained the 8 forms of thought destruction, which could be considered the supreme enlightenment. That alone could be considered immense fortune. Papak. Mok Jayanyan, who had been stepping through the body tempering postures, finally adjusted his stance and regulated his breathing. Phew. How long are you going to keep doing this? Chong Ryong spoke to him. That's because the sun, which had been high in the sky, was about to set. Is that so? After dealing with escort guard Gam and obtaining the body of outer hall master Sang Unbek through Ma Sung, Mok Jayangan, whose movement had become somewhat free, had been immersed in martial arts training for 4 days after obtaining the basic techniques of Yun Mok sword matter. In the first place, his purpose here was martial arts, so he was devoted to it. The conditions are favorable. It was the best, as he wasn't even disturbed. Of course, Mok Jayangan presumed that this wouldn't last long. The moment the forge master's breath ceased, it would likely be a series of troublesome events. Leaving at an appropriate time wouldn't be bad. After all, he had already obtained the martial arts. There was no need to stay here any longer. In any case, he had only one goal. Crunch. To make a wine cup from the skull of the bastard who killed his grandfather and place it on the ancestral altar. Mok Jayangan said with a bright smile, "Then shall we go in and have a meal?" At those words, the corners of Chong Ryong's mouth twitched upward as if she had been waiting. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Munch munch. Across from Mok Jayangan, who was holding a book, a young maidservant was sitting and immersed in eating. The young maidservant ate the braised pork and drank from a wine cup, showing a happy expression. Gulp. This taste is the best. Watching the young maidservant, Mok Jayangan chuckled. With that, the young maidservant refilled the wine cup and said, "What are you laughing at? You seem to be enjoying it a lot. One of the 3 joys of the living is eating. Someday, even you, mortal, will realize that this world is good even if you roll in a shit field." The young maidservant was none other than Chong Ryong, who had possessed her. Every mealtime, she would enter the body of the maidservant who brought the food. For 4 days, this had been her joy. Tuck tuck. Tuck tuck. The problem was that it didn't last long. Chong Ryong, who had taken over the young maidservant's body, looked at the back of her hand holding the wine cup and clicked her tongue. Tsk tisk. The veins were turning black and bulging out. An ordinary body couldn't withstand her ghost, which had ascended to the level of an imimaniang entity. 4 days ago, she had tried to obtain any body, entering the body of a pretty young maidservant to endure it, but that maidservant nearly died. This one can't even endure for a moment. Just bear with it a little. Until a suitable body appears. Hurry up and find one for me. At her words, Mok Jayangan smiled. In fact, he had no intention of finding her a body right away. Chong Ryong, who was of a high level and could always stay by his side, was his trump card. Don't nag. Yes, yes. By the way, you're too interested in exorcism techniques. Because it's interesting. The book Mok Jayangan was reading was an exorcism manual called the 6 People Spirit Summoning Technique, which the deceased diviner Sak had possessed. Mok Jayangan had asked to bring all of Sak's belongings. He had obtained many useful items, more so than from the diviner Myosin. There were several talisman techniques and a considerable number of related talismans. These were enough to pique Mok Jayangan's interest. There are quite a few interesting techniques here. For example, the dead flinch. Mok Jaeyoung furrowed his brow and turned his head to the side. At Mok Jaeyoung's attitude, Chom Rayong said with a glint in her eyes, "You've really become sensitive." At those words, Mok Jaeyoung closed the book and rose from his seat. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Half a quarter ago, in escort guard Go Chan's room, Go Chan brought a set of clothes to Ha Chai-rin. These are the clothes worn by the young maidservants. Slightly lifting and examining the clothes he had brought, she muttered with a chuckle, "So tacky. The courtesan clothes are better." Go Chan glanced at her. He had to let Mok Jaeyoung know about this somehow, but she hadn't given him a chance. Then, as a last resort, he thought of the maidservants' clothes. He intended to secretly go to Mok Jaeyoung and inform him of this fact while she was changing clothes. Go Chan slightly bowed his head and said, "Sect leader, I will step out for a moment while you change clothes." "Why? Don't you want to watch?" How could that be? It's a rare opportunity to see the bare body of someone with a figure like mine. With those words, she slightly revealed her cleavage. Ahem, ahem. Her mischievous behavior was still the same. Even though she was still like this, the fact that the former sect leader had passed on the sect leader position to her showed how remarkable he was. Go Chan bowed and waved his hands, trying to leave. To him, Ha Chai-rin said with a smile, "Uncle Go. Thank you. Thanks to you, I was able to enter here easily." At those words, Go Chan felt bitter inwardly. It wasn't a situation to be thanked for, as he had let her in half forcibly, regardless of his will. "No, it's nothing." "Then I'll step out," before he could finish his sentence. Puk. Needles embedded in the numbing acupoints. They were the young and flying needles. Go Chan looked at her with a perplexed gaze. Ha Chai-rin smirked and lowered her right hand, which was wearing a bracelet. Then, approaching him, she opened her mouth. "There's no need for that. What is the meaning of this?" "Your role ends here, uncle." "Pardon?" "I said, it ends here." "Be but sect leader? Did you really think I believed that foolish excuse you made?" "Huh. Oh no." Go Chan bit his lip tightly. From the beginning, she hadn't believed his words at all. She had merely used him to easily enter without triggering the defensive net of Yun Mok sword matter. The fact that you obediently remained under the person who killed your senior brother naturally means you submitted. What nonsense is a retired piece of trash spouting about enduring for the sake of revenge? Humph. Ha Chai-rin scoffed at Go Chan. At her laughter, Go Chan gritted his teeth. Seeing her unchanged personality disorder, his teeth ached. How did she pass the 100 days, 100 kills and become the sect leader of the flying killing sect? It was questionable. Suddenly, Go Chan furrowed his brow and opened his mouth. Could it be that you're in the midst of the 100 days, 100 kills? To become the sect leader of the assassin sect flying killing, there was a rite of passage. It involved taking a test called the 100 days, 100 kills. At his question, Ha Chai-rin silently curled the corners of her mouth. It was a sign of affirmation. No wonder something felt strange. It was odd for her, in the position of sect leader, to personally handle such a matter. If she weren't carrying out the 100 days, 100 kills, there was no way she would directly intervene in such a matter. Ha Chai-rin, who had been smiling with the corners of her mouth raised, said, "But you're not a complete idiot, I see." "That's right. The 60th sacrifice of the 100 days, 100 kills is none other than Mok Jaeyoung, the third young master of Yun Mok sword matter." Go Chan was drained by his own powerlessness. Since when had things become so tangled? Everything had turned into a mess after that fake Mok Jaeyoung appeared. No, was it because he was so weak that he couldn't even escape being a second-rate at this age, being swayed back and forth and ending up like this? At that moment, Ha Chai-rin drew the dagger from Go Chan's waist. What are you doing?" In response to that question, she smirked and said, "Uncle, you killed the young master you served for the sake of avenging Uncle Gam and then committed suicide. Got it? F from the beginning. Ta 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 tack." Ha Chiren sealed even Go Chan's fatal acupoints. Then, placing her index finger on her lips, she whispered, "Shoo. Be quiet. You should be grateful that I'm saving your honor as a member of the flying killing sect, even though you're retired." With those words, Ha Chiren tried to slit Go Chan's throat. It was at that very moment. Pat. Wyrick. The dagger in her hand escaped and flew through the door screen. Pack. Through the pierced door screen, someone could be seen holding the dagger. At this, Ha Chiren's eyes widened. Oh. A bystander? Kwang. While she was astonished, that someone kicked open the door and revealed himself. It was none other than Mok Jiangun. "Escort guard Go Chan, were you in danger?" For the first time, Go Chan thought this devilish fellow looked cool. Chapter 40. Dangerous Visit. Part 3. Despite her fiery temperament, Ha Chiren had undergone rigorous training and education under Flying Killing Yama's guest, one of the 4 great assassins of the Central Plains. The essence of assassination lies in gathering information and preparation. Therefore, she began investigating her target, Mok Jiangun, in various ways. However, upon investigation, this Mok Jiangun was no different from a naive young master. She had heard that his martial arts were so poor that he was considered third-rate, not even acknowledged by the other brothers or retainers of the Yun Mok sword matter. But how did such a fellow kill the 29th mid-level assassin? There were 2 possibilities she could surmise here. One was that the real culprit could be someone else. The person who leaked this information to them was from the same Yun Mok sword matter, but he was another young master who had to compete for succession. It was entirely possible. And secondly, did he hide his true abilities for this day? She considered the latter less likely than the former. This was because he was only 17 years old, and if he had to compete for succession, there was no reason for him to hide his strength. The fact that the Yun Mok sword manor master was suffering from an illness was a recent development. Thus, she was even more certain. This is completely unexpected. Ha Chiren momentarily doubted her eyes. Although born a woman, she had reached the pinnacle of martial arts through her grandfather's unwavering support and teachings. Even she could not perform the void-seizing technique. Yet, the 17-year-old naive young master of the Mok clan, whom she had regarded as an ignorant child, was capable of this? Ha Chiren's eyes narrowed as she looked at Mok Jiangun, but why? If he possessed profound internal energy to the extent of being capable of void seizing, he should have reached at least the pinnacle stage of the transformation realm. However, no matter how she sensed his aura, he seemed to be merely third-rate. It was exactly as she had heard. Strange. He demonstrated void seizing, yet his aura was third-rate. But the atmosphere emanating from him was uncannily ominous. Perhaps that was why she couldn't gauge him at all. It was possible that she couldn't sense it because he had concealed his energy. "Yo, young master." At that moment, the guard Go Chan called out to Mok Jiangun in a voice close to relief. It was understandable, as he would have lost his life with his throat slit if it had been a bit later. However, the crisis was not over. Pack. Hyuk. Ha Chiren grabbed Go Chan's throat and pulled him towards her. The startled Go Chan tried to twist his body to break free, but he couldn't resist due to the significant difference in their internal energy levels. Holding Go Chan, she spoke to Mok Jiangun. "If you don't want to see your bodyguard die, I advise you not to move, young Master Mok." At her words, Go Chan let out a faint sigh. That was because Ha Chiren knew nothing about that fellow. Although he had just saved his life, that fellow was not the type to dance to someone else's tune in the first place. Then, Mok Jiangun opened his mouth. "Who are you?" To this question, Ha Chiren laughed and said, "There's no reason for me to tell you that, young master. Rather, I would like you to take a step back." She was keeping Mok Jiangun in check. If it weren't for the void-seizing technique he had just displayed, she wouldn't have been this cautious. However, she needed to prepare for the worst-case scenario. It was difficult to gauge Mok Jae-un's exact martial arts level, and at this point, a normal assassination was already out of the question. Should I retreat? As she pondered this, she felt the throat she was holding tremble slightly. She noticed Go-chan moving his lips. At this, she tightened her grip on his throat even more. Quack. Kek. Old man Go seems to be intent on harboring animosity towards us. Seeing as you're even doing this kind of thing. At those words, Go-chan found it absurd even in the midst of his suffering. It was ridiculous to hear her babble about animosity when she was the one who had tried to kill him first. An assassin from the flying killing sect? Ho. So you were an assassin? Yuruk. At Mok Jae-un's words, she made an annoyed expression. He had nicely summarized and exposed her identity. This damn bastard. There was nothing worse than an assassin failing and having their affiliation revealed as well. Now that things had come to this, she had to kill Mok Jae-un in some way. No, the goal was to kill him even if she had to retreat and change her approach. Once designated as a 100-day 100-kill target, if she couldn't kill him, she wouldn't be able to receive the title of the 4 Great Assassins or become the society leader of the flying killing sect. Do I have to finish it? Although she still couldn't be sure of Mok Jae-un's martial arts level, she did have a secret technique as a last resort. It was the extreme killing needle attached to her wrist. Since it was specially made, it could only be used once, but if used within a distance of 3 jang, even skilled martial artists would find it difficult to block with their protective chi. She was told to use it when her life was in danger, but it might not be a situation to hold back. If I let my guard down, I could be the one to suffer. Without lowering her guard, she slowly lowered her left hand. At this, Mok Jae-un spoke. Let him go. What? If you release the guard Go-chan, I'll let you go this time. It's very rare for me to let someone who targeted my life go. What? Go-chan was inwardly surprised. He didn't expect that devilish fellow to let an assassin who had come to take his life go for his sake. Wasn't he just a pawn to be used by that guy? He thought he would naturally be abandoned, so it was truly unexpected. Just let him go? Huh. On the other hand, at Mok Jae-un's words, one of Ha Chai-ren's eyebrows arched upward. His attitude, as if bestowing mercy, was annoying. However, she also thought it was rather fortunate. The fellow had made a mistake. The fact that he was willing to let go of an assassin who had targeted his life to save a single bodyguard was proof that he didn't take Go-chan lightly. Still holding Go-chan's throat, she took a step back and said, Young Master Mok. It seems you care a great deal for your bodyguard. No. Not particularly. It's just my whim that I don't want to let a useful person like Guard Go-chan die right away. Whim. Humph. Scoffing, she said to Mok Jae-un. Well then, if you want to save this person's life according to your whim, move back 10 steps and kneel down. Then, I'll release the bodyguard as soon as I leave the estate. As she spoke, she used the hidden angle to switch the trigger on her wrist and loaded the extreme killing needle. She had already visualized the unfolding situation several times in her mind. The moment Mok Jae-un stepped back, she planned to use Go-chan as a shield and push forward, firing the extreme killing needle from her hidden angle. Hurry up and step ba-. It was at that very moment. She discovered that Mok Jae-un's gaze was not directed at her but slightly behind her. At the same time, flinch. Sensing something strange behind her back, she hurriedly switched her wrist and shot the spectral needle. Poof 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 puck. However, there was nothing behind her. What? She was sure she had felt something approaching from behind just now. It was an eerie sensation, but what on earth? Pack. Kek. In an instant, she grabbed Go-chan, whose throat she was holding, and twisted her body to one side. At that moment, a dagger brushed past her right side. Seeing Ha Chairen's appearance as she dodged, Mok Jiangun's eyes gleamed with interest. Faster than Mok Yuqion. And more sensitive in perception. Chang Ryong, who had targeted Ha Chairen's back, spoke. The senses of a peak-level expert are incomparable to those of a first-class martial artist. My ghostly aura is too strong, so it's not easy to approach within one jang. It seems so. Throughout Mok Yuqion's narration, he kept glancing at Chang Ryong's location from time to time. Upon reaching the peak realm, it seemed that one becomes more adept at manipulating energy, to the point of being sensitive even to spiritual energy. Then, Ha Chairen spoke to Mok Jiangun with sharpened eyes. Young Master Mok. You had an accomplice. She was certain. The eerie and unfamiliar sensation she had felt from behind. She didn't know what it was, but her senses couldn't be wrong when she was already on high alert. And she realized one thing. It was weak. The dagger Mok Jiangun had thrown earlier was a surprise attack, but the force behind it was weak. If a martial artist above the peak level had thrown it with intent, she would have been hit on the shoulder in that fleeting moment. Something was strange. It was a perfect opportunity, yet he let it slip. Could it be? Perhaps the void-seizing technique he had demonstrated earlier was not Mok Jiangun's skill. It could have been the help of this unfamiliar entity that couldn't be sensed. As her thoughts reached this point, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. If Mok Jiangun was not the kind of expert she should be wary of, she could definitely kill him. Extreme Killing Needle. In a split second, killing intent rose from her. Sensing this, Mok Jiangun spoke in a cold voice. It seems you'll become the most wicked person. No. Not at all. With those words, Ha Chairen pushed Go Chan towards Mok Jiangun as she was. Papa Papa Pack. And as she approached within 3 jang, she struck Go Chan's back with her left palm. Paong. A sound of something exploding rang out. Kek. The extreme killing needle that penetrated Go Chan's back flew accurately towards Mok Jiangun's forehead. The power of the extreme killing needle flying at a tremendous speed was at a level that could pierce through the protective chi of decent internal energy experts. However, Wyrick. The flying extreme killing needle twisted its trajectory upwards and penetrated Mok Jiangun's raised right palm. Puk. Ha Chairen's eyes widened. The flying extreme killing needle changed its trajectory. What on earth was happening? As she was puzzled, she heard a woman's voice in her left ear. You should have left when he said he'd let you go, foolish one. Startled by the voice right next to her, she leaped to the right and shot the spectral needle. However, there was nothing there. Poof 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 puk. She was sure she heard a voice right beside her. But why couldn't she see anything? As she was bewildered, something pulled her body to the ground with immense force. Pack. Kwang. Ack. A final scream burst out from Ha Chairen's mouth as she hit the ground. The startled Ha Chairen circulated her energy and tried to gather as much internal power as possible. Then, she tried to generate a repulsive force to shake off the power pressing down on her body. However, heek. At that moment, an unbelievable thing occurred. Bubble bubble. The surroundings of Ha Chairen, who was pressed against the ground, were filled with rising blood, and everything turned red. At the same time, a foul stench of blood filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Faced with this bizarre situation she had never experienced before, she couldn't understand what was happening. Kaduk. Kaduk. For a moment, she doubted her eyes. Dozens of red hands emerged from the ground, grabbing and pulling at her arms and legs, making her heart feel like it would burst. It was so terrifying that she couldn't even scream. Squirm squirm. All she could do was twist her body. Looking at Ha Chairen like this, Chang Ryong sneered. Since it's the body I'll be using, I'll try not to leave too many scratches. She was enjoying this. Watching Chang Ryong, who was delighted, and Ha Chairen, who was suffering from fear, Mok Jiangun shook his head. I told you you'd be the most wicked person. He had clearly warned her. He had even given her a chance to live by holding the guard Go Chan's throat and threatening him. However, in the end, she had missed this opportunity. Cough cough. Mok Jaeyoung examined Go Chan, who was turning bluer and colder, with blood filling his mouth. Blood continuously flowed from his pierced chest, and it seemed his heart had been penetrated, leaving no hope. Looking at him, Mok Jaeyoung spoke in a dry voice. "What a pity. I thought we could have been together a little longer." He had done his best to save him. But he was really unlucky. Mok Jaeyoung looked down at the dying Go Chan and continued, "You've worked hard. I won't forget guard Go Chan's efforts." Cough. "Young master. I don't want to die," Go Chan muttered something with difficulty. It was the intense desire to live of a dying human being. Mok Jaeyoung stared at him indifferently and said, "Your attachment to life is strong." Cough cough. "Please." As Go Chan's eyes gradually became hazy, Mok Jaeyoung looked down at him and muttered, his lips twitching, "There might be room for us to be together a little longer." With those words, he took something out from his waist. Something was written in red ink, but Go Chan's vision was getting blurry, making it difficult to see clearly. Mok Jaeyoung placed that talisman on Go Chan's forehead. Then, placing his palm on Go Chan's chest, he said, "According to the six-person spirit summoning technique, vengeful spirits are born not only from strong resentment but also from the overflowing resentment and death energy at the place of death." As soon as he finished speaking, a chilling and ominous energy surged from Mok Jaeyoung's palm. Gu. Chapter 41. Dangerous Visit. Part 4. Everything appeared black. Guard Go Chan felt no sensation in his body. And he realized that everything around him was empty, and he couldn't feel any of his five senses. Am I dead after all? He thought his life was truly pathetic. He was an orphan who didn't even know who his parents were, and he had lived half his life as an assassin after being taken in by an assassination organization. Just when he finally retired and tried to live like a human being, everything became twisted because of one damn imposter. Everything felt unjust, and he could only lament. Where am I going? He was curious at times about what happens when you die. But then, a familiar voice reached his ears. With meager words and numbers, success lies in the timing. Today's alcoholic offering enters the profound realm, communicating with and receiving the spirits I rely on, the spirits I seek. Weighing and pouring the ceremonial fruit, I bear the shadow of regret as I carry the sacred fragrance within me. Even in death, he could hear this voice. It was the voice of that imposter. Am I suffering even in death? Having lived as an assassin, he never thought he would go to paradise. But hearing this voice even after death made him depressed. However, the voice continued. The third invocation, a leisurely return and surrender. 8 pecks and 8 flavors, fresh and new. Choose wisely, devote yourself to the knowledge of the spirits. Desires. As soon as those words ended, Go Chan felt himself being pulled by some strong unknown force, and the sensations that had disappeared were faintly replaced by something else. Along with it, the blackness in his vision brightened. Go Chan blinked his eyes. He saw Mok Jaeyoung forming some strange hand seal in front of him. What was this? Wasn't he dead? While he was puzzled, he noticed a captivating woman with a dumbfounded expression beside Mok Jaeyoung. Hyuk. It was none other than Ha Chai-rin. What on earth was this situation? Why were the two of them looking at him like this? As he was wondering, Ha Chai-rin opened her mouth. Did it work? Yes. It seems to have succeeded. The half-6/8 spirit summoning technique. Half-6/8 spirit summoning technique? What did that mean? The half-6/8 spirit summoning technique. It is a type of sorcery that utilizes the 8-person talisman to control ghosts. Not knowing this, Go Chan had no idea what the two were talking about. At that moment, Mok Jaeyoung lowered his hands from the seal and said, Go Chan, let me apologize first. Huh? What? Go-chan was momentarily startled. His voice didn't sound like his own, but rather some strange, different form. Then, Mok Jaeyoung shrugged and said, "Reviving you was impossible from the start, so I tried to turn you into a corpse ghost using the 6-person spirit summoning technique. But it seems that failed because my death energy is still insufficient." "Yo, young master? What in the world are you talking about? And why does my voice sound like this? Huh?" Go-chan was stunned for a moment as he looked at his body. He looked at his palm, but why did it appear so hazy? He could see through his palm to the other side. He had no idea what this phenomenon was. "Hey, you fool. Your soul's rank has fallen, so it appears even more hazy. Don't make a fuss," Ha Chiren said to him. "What?" At this, Go-chan frowned as he looked at her. This bitch had tried to kill Mok Jaeyoung by piercing through his heart, and now she was acting as if they were acquainted? As if sensing this thought, Mok Jaeyoung said, "Ah, guard Go-chan. This isn't the assassin from the Baisal sect that you knew." "What? What do you mean by that?" Chang Ryang has taken over her body. Go-chan couldn't help but be confused by the incomprehensible words. Why was his body like this, and what on earth was Mok Jaeyoung talking about? To the bewildered Go-chan, Mok Jaeyoung scratched his head and said, "Guard Go-chan, I think I need to tell you this." "What is it, young master?" "You're dead." "What?" "I'm saying guard Go-chan is dead." "What do you mean by that?" "I am currently..." Suddenly, Go-chan's expression stiffened. Come to think of it, it was strange that his voice sounded eerie and that he appeared translucent. So he went to a place where there was a mirror to look around. Go-chan was at a loss for words. His reflection did not appear in the mirror. "Young master. Am I really dead?" "Yes." Go-chan was speechless. He felt a mixture of emotions and a sudden surge of grief. He had held on to a faint hope. The hope that he might not be dead. Seeing him like this, Mok Jaeyoung offered condolences that were not quite comforting in a dry voice. "May you rest in peace. Are you mocking me right now? Are you playing with me?" Go-chan couldn't hold back his anger anymore, beyond the surge of emotions. Now that he was dead anyway, he was sick and tired of being mindful of this fellow, and there was no reason to do so anymore. "If you hadn't killed Master Gam, none of this would have happened, you damn bastard." Curses poured out of him. Seeing him like this, Chang Ryang, who had taken over Ha Chiren's body, laughed. She had expected him to be this angry to some extent. In fact, without considerable anger or obsession, souls usually ascend rather than becoming vengeful spirits. But it was Mok Jaeyoung who had forcibly held on to him and turned him into this state. His rank has fallen too. In terms of rank, Go-chan was the lowest grade spirit. He was no more than a street-level spirit that could be seen only very rarely. "Damn bastard. You son of a bitch. Bastard. Die. Die. I curse you even in death. No, I'm already dead. Anyway, I curse you. You imposter. From the 4th generation to the 5th generation, misfortune. Phew. Shut up," Mok Jaeyoung said with a sigh. At that moment, something strange happened. MMPH. Go-chan couldn't open his mouth as Mok Jaeyoung commanded. He wanted to curse, but the words wouldn't come out regardless of his will. Why was this happening? To the puzzled Go-chan, Mok Jaeyoung said with a smile. "Although you're dead, guard Go-chan has become my servant spirit through the half-6/8 spirit summoning technique." What did that mean again? You're curious about what a servant spirit is, right? To put it simply, a slave ghost? Yes, you can think of it that way. A slave ghost? Huh. Do you want to die, you fool? Chang Ryang glared at Mok Jaeyoung and raised her voice. At this, Mok Jaeyoung waved his hand lightly and corrected himself. "Let's just say he's a ghost who has to cooperate with me." "Ah, you can't speak. If I let you, will you keep cursing?" Go-chan shook his head vigorously. How obedient. Then you can speak again. Ah? At Mok Jaehyun's command, his voice returned. At this, Go-chan was momentarily confused about how to accept this situation. He had thought that now that he was dead, he wouldn't be swayed by this fellow anymore, so he had cursed to his heart's content. But even in death, he had to follow this fellow's orders? Damn it. Curses naturally came to his mind. Of course, they didn't come out of his mouth. Now that he knew Mok Jaehyun could control him with a single word, he became afraid of this fellow. What the hell is he? He had witnessed strange scenes several times. But he never imagined that he would possess such unbelievable abilities. The power to make even the dead submit to him was absurd. To such Go-chan, Mok Jaehyun said. Anyway, guard Go-chan, I'm glad we can continue to be together. Glad? Did he think he would be happy to be ordered around by him even in death? It was not only disheartening but also distressing. You don't like it? It seems you don't like it. Then should I just let you go? At those words, Go-chan looked at him with a gleam in his eyes. He thought he would be used even in death, but was he really going to let him go? As he was feeling hopeful, Mok Jaehyun glanced at Chong Ryong and said, I don't know the technique to release a servant spirit yet. Is there any other way to release him? If I knew that, would I be in this state? I see. Or if he desires it so much, you can forcibly exorcise him. At those words, Go-chan asked in puzzlement. What is exorcism? It means forcibly banishing a spirit, you fool. Banish? Then does that mean I'll die? That's right. I'm already dead though. If you die further from there, you'll be annihilated. Does that mean I'll completely disappear? Yes. You'll completely vanish from this world. Who knows, there might be something else, but I don't know since I haven't experienced it myself. At these words, Go-chan's face stiffened. He thought if Mok Jaehyun released him, he would go to a place like the afterlife. But from what they were saying now, it sounded like they would kill his soul. Suddenly, Go-chan became afraid. Even now that he was dead and had become a spirit, it was terrifying, and the concept of completely disappearing evoked immense fear. Was that why? Yo young master. Go-chan knelt down in front of Mok Jaehyun. Then, lowering his head, he pleaded. I misspoke. Having just died and being confused about what was happening, I was rude to you, young master. Didn't you say you didn't want to be with me? No. I absolutely want to be with you, young master. Not wanting to be with you? That's an absurd thing to say. Although I have died like this, now that I have another chance to be with you, I will serve you with utmost loyalty. It was a quick change of attitude. Even though he was dead, Go-chan feared further changes here. Seeing his appearance, Chong Ryong clicked her tongue. Tuck. Then, Chong Ryong frowned. Noticing her expression, Mok Jaehyun asked, Is it as expected? At that question, Chong Ryong muttered in an irritated voice. This one can't endure it either. I thought it would be a bit better, but it's a useless wench. At those words, Go-chan looked at her in puzzlement. That expression and way of speaking were completely different from Ha Chai-rin's. What was going on? Tuck. Tuck. At that moment, black blood vessels bulged out from the neck of Ha Chai-rin, who was expressing anger. Then, Chong Ryong, who was inside Ha Chai-rin's body, let out a deep sigh and SSSSS. She emerged from that body. Thud. Ha Chai-rin's body collapsed on the ground like a corpse. At that moment, Go-chan froze like an ice sculpture. He wondered what it was, but Chong Ryong, who had emerged from Ha Chai-rin's body, was truly a shock in itself. What is this? Among spirits, their ranks can be clearly distinguished. Just as humans have 5 senses, spirits have their own alternative senses. Those senses were warning Go-chan that this was a monster beyond imagination. Wah-wah. It was as if the surroundings were dyed in blood, walls were collapsing, and even the ground was splitting apart in an illusion. This was definitely not an ordinary spirit. At that moment, Chang Ryong raised an eyebrow and said to Go Chan, "Won't you lower your gaze?" At those words, Go Chan trembled and slowly lowered his head. Then, Chang Ryong snorted and said, "A newbie spirit whose body is still warm from just dying dares to stare at me? I apologize." Go Chan felt disheartened once again. He thought that everyone would be the same in death, but that wasn't the case. Even in death, there was still a gap in power in that world, and he was no different from the weak. While this was happening, Mok Jiangun said, "What a shame. I thought it was a quite suitable body. I didn't have high expectations." "Is that so?" He clearly remembered her being very pleased. Where else could he find the body of a young woman who had reached the pinnacle of transcendent realm? He thought this level would be able to handle Chang Ryong, but in just a few moments, the body couldn't endure it and cracked like the servant ghosts. "I guess there's no choice. It's a pity, but this body. What's there to pity? We can just use it." "Pardon? The rank has fallen anyway, so it won't be of much use in the spirit state. We can give it to this fellow." At those words, Mok Jiangun looked at Go Chan with interest. Go Chan tilted his head with an anxious expression, wondering what they were talking about. "Why me all of a sudden?" Then, Chang Ryong suddenly approached Go Chan. "SSSK." Feeling fear from the overwhelming pressure, Go Chan instinctively tried to back away, but Chang Ryong grabbed his neck as if hooking him and pushed him somewhere. "Why are you doing this? Stop blabbering and go in. It's rare for a newbie to have this opportunity." Pack. It was Ha Chiren's body, lying on the ground like a dead person. "Oh? SSSSSK." At that moment, Go Chan's spirit was forcibly pushed into Ha Chiren's body by Chang Ryong against his will. Ha Chiren's body, which was lying on the ground, squirmed and moved wildly. Looking down at this with his arms crossed, Mok Jiangun said indifferently, "Is it alright? Don't know. I've cleared out the ego, so even if the rank has fallen, it should be able to take control quickly." "Is that so?" But he wondered if it was really alright. While this was happening, Ha Chiren, who had been convulsing as if in agony by herself, suddenly sat up and spoke with a bewildered look in her eyes. "Why all of a sudden? Hyuk. What is this?" She couldn't hide her bewilderment at her own voice. After being startled like that, she lowered her head to look at her chest and was even more shocked. What on earth is this?" No matter how you looked at it, it was a woman's body. Mok Jiangun shrugged and said to him as if there was no other choice, "Yes. It seems you'll have to work with that body from now on."